Welcome to the Data Literacy Show, the podcast that helps you build, measure, and level up your data and AI literacy. I'm Alli Torban, the Senior Data Literacy Advocate here at Data Literacy.
And I'm Ben Jones, co-founder and CEO of Data Literacy. Now today, Alli and I are going to chat about what the best data stories have in common. So Alli and I have seen and created many different data stories over the years, and we've noticed that the great ones always seem to share a few common traits.
Yeah, and we've actually been studying a lot of data stories lately because we just launched our new course, Data Storytelling for Impact. Yay! It was a long time coming. We finally got it out the door. Super proud of it. You can actually enroll in it now.
Right now.
And just in studying data stories, and like Ben said, we have created a lot, seen a lot. We have seen that there are a lot of different kinds of data stories, like a data story that you see presented in a boardroom, or all the way to the scrolly telling piece on the New York Times website.
You gotta love that word, scrolly telling.
Yeah, me too, scrolly telling.
So
like if you haven't heard it, you're scrolling through the website and things are changing and moving. The charts are changing. The data points are moving as you scroll. So those are called scrolly telling. And we love those. And we have found that certain patterns have emerged among the most memorable data stories. So today, we really want to show the three traits we've noticed in every impactful data story. So we're going to start with the very first one. That is that these data stories are audience first. And this is a huge differentiator. So the best data storytellers absolutely do not dump all their data on their audience. It's just so tempting to want to share all the cool analysis and the lists of data sets that you masterfully sourced, but that is definitely a recipe for an instant eye glaze. And we do not want our audience's eyes glazing over like a donut, that's for sure.
Yeah, that would not be good. So, we really need to take that time, to be the filter for your audience. So, think about, what do they care about? What decision are they facing? So that's going to help you figure out what you can leave out.
Yeah, super important what you include, what you leave out. Other questions you can ask, like, what does my audience already know? What kind of data literacy do they have? Are they going to understand these kinds of charts that I'm putting together? Maybe they need extra context to understand this particular insight. And also thinking about what decisions or actions are you wanting them to take at the end? And these questions are really going to help you filter out what you should and shouldn't show in your data story.
Right. And you kind of need time to kind of figure that out, So in that course that you just finished building, Alli, you really call out that time for, just creating, but also testing the message itself, with members of your audience if possible. And you want to do that again, up front, right? Before you jump in to start designing charts and graphs and visuals. So you're kind of laying a firm groundwork and foundation to build on as you go forward. That can make a huge difference, right?
Yeah, you really want to make sure you're thinking about your audience from the very, very beginning, and you can save a lot of wasted effort. And we had even created a data story for a client recently, and they had this slide and it had 5 or 6 pie charts showing all the different metrics that they had in the survey, which is totally logical because those were the questions in the survey. But they found that it was very overwhelming to anybody who looked at it. So I did encourage them to craft a message that's relevant to their audience first, and then just use the 2 or 3 metrics that are relevant to that message. And the data story came out really impactful because it was really audience first.
Yeah, I remember that moment when you showed it to them and they did love it and they almost fell out of their chairs. They said, we need more of this kind of data storytelling within our teams. So it was really big. I think it made a big difference to the way they were able to kind of take in the information, the way you packaged it for them. So now, okay, that's trait number 1. Right? Audience first.
Yep.
What about number 2? We're really big about the human element here at Data Literacy, and great data stories know how to incorporate the human element. So they don't just show the data and the charts, they show humans. So they're bringing the data back to real people and real consequences. I kind of like to think of it like a chemical reaction. You have 2 kind of elements, the data element, the statistics, the charts. You also have the human element, real people, their stories, their faces even. If you put those together, that chemical reaction can really take place and you can get that huge impact. So, Anecdotes by themselves, well, they can be very powerful. They can tug at the heartstrings, but they can also be misleading because they can leave out the broader context that the data can provide.
Yeah. And I feel like including the human element is maybe something we don't think about as necessary when we're talking about data. Like, just let the data speak itself. But it is important. It makes it more memorable. And
Yeah.
I have interviewed a lot of data journalists, and they really taught me that, hey, data is meaningless on its own, and
Mhm.
it can make the charts feel detached from the real world. And we as humans are the ones who give data meaning. So you have to make sure to include the human element. And one really great example of this is one of our favorite data stories by Alvin Chang of Vox, where he's telling us about how the average height of South Koreans changed so much over the 20th century. And this is really cool video, this data story video that you can see on YouTube. We'll link it in the show notes. And what he has is this bar chart showing the average height of women in the country back in 1896. And then suddenly he shows a cutout photograph of Beyonce to the right of the chart, along with a label of her height, which is 5'7". And the biggest bar only comes up to like her ear. And suddenly we just see the data in a whole new light. And we have this useful context. And we remember we're talking about people. And it's also very memorable.
Yes, and I love how at the end of that very data story, Alvin Chang tells us why this topic matters so much to him personally. So he actually shows photos of his own family, his grandparents, his parents, and he tells us about his own family's flight from North Korea in the war in the 1950s. So, the lesson, I guess, is if you leave your story at, here's how some metric changed, you're not even really halfway there because, the best stories, they take that next big step and they say, okay, here's why this change matters so much, why it matters to me, and then why even maybe it should matter to you too. So let's
Mhm.
call that maybe the so what factor.
Yeah, and you can really look to journalists, data journalists, to get some tips on how to do this because they do it really well. They're already in this mindset because they know people are constantly asking themselves when they're reading the news, well, why do I care about this? You need to keep the human element front and center.
Exactly, yeah. And you bringing up the news journalism, I got to spend a lot of time with them as well when I was at Tableau, running Tableau Public, going to all the news conferences around the country, and yeah, learning a lot about how to tell a great story and incorporating data into there. And so that's even a perfect segue into this third trait of ours, which is all about the pacing of the story. So, one of the best examples of this is published back by BBC in 2010, and it features my favorite all-time data storyteller, the late great Dr. Hans Rosling. So it's called 200 Countries, 200 Years, 4 Minutes. And in it, Dr. Rosling not only connects us to the human element in the story, he really nails the pacing and the sequencing. I mean, the YouTube video has over 11 million views.
Hmm.
We'll link it in the show notes. You got to watch it. So what he does is he's building up and walking us through this one bubble chart. And this bubble chart, what it shows is life expectancy and how that relates to, the wealth of countries and income per person all across the world over hundreds of years. And so he's actually taking us on a tour through the data. And it's super interesting, but every step along the way, he's painting a picture of what life is like for people. They're living in certain countries and different periods of time.
Hmm. Yeah, he's doing the previous trait that we just talked about connecting the
Right.
human element. They're not just dots on a grid. When he's
Yeah,
describing everything, I can see images in my mind of the people around the world living their lives, experiencing major events like war and illness.
exactly. And that's what he did here. Not only that he did that, but it was really the way he did it. And it was really brilliant. So we know bubble charts can be overwhelming to many people, especially when there's a lot of bubbles and so much data. So, at the end of the video, Hans even said that this one bubble chart had over 120,000 data points in it.
Yeah, and that's not big data, but it is a lot of data points for one person to take in. So that it doesn't feel overwhelming at all, he slowly builds it up and explains each part. So at first he shows us what the position on the charts mean. We got the vertical axis is the life expectancy, the horizontal axis is the wealth axis. And then he says, okay, he's going to plot each country. And if it's on the lower left, then that means poor and sick. And on the upper right hand corner, it means rich and healthy.
Yeah, exactly. And then, he sets the stage for us. He like, shows us his canvas, actually telling us what the locations mean. And then he also tells us what the data means in layman's terms, right? Then he plots the data for 1 year, I think back in the 1800s, I think, and he begins to animate it for future years. So you can see the data points actually moving and you see the trends in the movement.
Yeah, and of course we love to see this movement and trends as humans. It's so cool to see how things change over time. But he also step by step takes us through the different encodings that he uses in the chart too. So like he adds the bubbles and then he shows them colored in using different colors. So first Europe is brown, then Asia is red, and so on. And that's helping us learn the different regions that they have different colors. And then he actually holds a bubble up in front of him while he tells us what the size means, which is the country's population. So it's a lot of data, but because he added it piece by piece, he's helping pace us through it in a way that it's not overwhelming.
Exactly. And if you think about it, when you're presenting at work some complex diagram, let's say in some slide presentation, well, it isn't really that uncommon to introduce the diagram sort of step by step, every click bringing a single element into the view. Maybe there's a box and then an arrow and then another box, right? And we have this slide build. But how come when we present charts, even complex ones, we just throw the whole chart at our audience all at once? And that can be very overwhelming for them. So, why not build our charts too, like Hans did in the video? So, you have to think carefully maybe about how to add them so that you make sure your audience isn't getting overloaded with information. But I think it can have a great impact. And that's exactly what we can do with our data storytelling course that we put out there. So, and there's even in there one step dedicated to kind of building out the storyboarding and the sequencing of your data story. So you think through every step, what you're showing them, in what order, and how that can really reveal the story to them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, pacing through your data story is really important. It's another thing that you will make your audience's eyes glaze over if you overwhelm them with information. So another tool in your toolbox is to make sure to carefully pace through your data story. It really makes it easy to follow, even if the topic is really complex. And a lot of people think, well, I can't simplify my data any further to help people understand it. But what I like to say is don't think about it like you're simplifying the data. Think about simplifying the experience of understanding the data. And this can be really challenging. This is super hard, which is why in the course, I give everyone who takes the course sample narrative sequences that they can try out based on the type of audience that they're speaking to. So if they're speaking to more of an executive audience or maybe to a more analyst type audience, what's a good way to pace through and sequence through your story to make it help them understand it the best?
Yeah, you really want to make it easy for them to digest. You want them nodding their heads, not shaking their heads. You want them connecting to it. You want them understanding why they should care. And these are the straightforward yet super powerful elements that take a data story from good to great. And it can be make or break. It can make the difference between your audience really getting the message and making that decision and just walking away feeling a little confused. So in summary, what do you want to do? Crafting a data story, ask yourself, number one, is this story tailored to my audience? Number two, have I connected the insight to a real human experience or consequence? And then number three, what about the pacing? Is it clear? Is it focused? Is it easy for people to follow the steps and understand it?
Yeah, and these are important. They may sound easy. We know that they're hard. And in order to help you, we have just created this data storytelling course, which has a repeatable framework that will help you create impactful data stories. So you can join our data storytelling for impact course. There's 6 lessons that will walk you through the impact framework, which is actually an acronym standing for insight, message, plan, align, clarify, and test. And we show lots of examples, including a real business example that we illustrate through a really fun series of comic strips, which I think you'll love. There's about 90 minutes of video, and by the end, you'll know how to create your own impactful data stories.
It's actually a business example from our own business, isn't it? I love that.
Yeah, it's fun.
We took our own data as a company and we used it for the course. So it's real world data. So and I think it's a great course. I've been going through it. You did a great job on it, Alli.
Thanks.
I just got my certificate and my badge, and I added
Yeah,
it to
you can add a badge
my
to your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I sure did. I sure did. And I hope many other people do.
Yes.
So we're excited for you and your team to enroll, level up those data storytelling skills. Check out the show notes. There's going to be a link in there so you can learn more about it. And you can, of course, find all this on dataliteracy.com, and you'll see it there.
Great. Yes. Thanks for joining us on the Data Literacy Show. Subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.
All right. See you next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.